On a cold, snowy day, there's nothing I like to make more than my mother's recipe for the most tender pot roast, or slow-cooked pork shoulder for delicious pulled pork sandwiches. I especially love the classic combination of cabbage with caramelized apples. What's the secret to these mouth-watering dishes? It's called braising, and today I'll teach you all the techniques you'll need to prepare these dishes at home. When it comes to braising, the best cuts of meat to use are generally the most flavorful, and they come from the harder worked muscle groups, the leg, the shoulder, the neck areas of the animal. Butcher Pat Lafreda is here to share his knowledge of the best slow-cooked cuts. So Pat, I'm so happy that you're here with some very delicious looking cuts of meat. Can we just go through them one by one and understand why these are so good for braising?
Sure. One of my favorite pieces of meat to braise is brisket, and in my family history, I mean, this
So
goes.
that's pot roast, right? Sort of?
It's sort of like pot roast,
Yeah.
yes, but there are two muscles in the brisket that a lot of people don't realize. Most people go for the first cut, which is the bottom, more uniform rectangular shape. The second cut, otherwise known as the decal, which is here, has so much more marbling.
Is that this part up here?
Right, that's this part. So what I do and what my family's always done was taken that part off, the less desirable, less expensive part, and we braise that. So we rub it with some ground clove, braise it, and then serve it with a reduced honey and brown sugar.
Oh, yum.
Oh, it's delicious.
I'm going to try that. And then what is this beautiful piece?
This is a chuck pot roast. So where the ribeye ended, the spinalis muscle and the longissimus muscle continue into the shoulder, and that's the first cut out of the chuck.
Now, those look like short ribs.
Yes, those are plate short ribs and of the tastiest cuts of all. So those three bones from the plate short rib yield the most amount of meat, and that's how you have them so thick. So cut flanken style like that's the perfect way to ask your butcher to cut that.
Now, one of my favorite meats on this whole table is this.
Yes,
Which,
I think...
which a lot of people don't ever eat, but it is so delicious.
And no matter what animal it's on, it's the tail, but most commonly referred to as the oxtail.
Right.
And you could see how much connective tissue that there is around it, and that's where all that flavor comes from. So braising this on the bone, you get the flavors from the bone, you get the flavors from the connective tissue.
And it's one of the easiest things to braise, I find. I mean, just brown it, add a little bit of water, salt, pepper.
And pull it.
And that's it. Yeah, it's so delicious. Now, these are amazing veal shanks, right?
Yes.
For ossobuco?
So these are center cut veal shanks, and when you order these from your butcher, you should ask for the hind shank because it's the most uniform and you get a great amount of marrow from the center of that bone.
Yep, and the marrow is what really makes it such a luxurious dish.
It does.
And get out your marrow spoons.
Yes, I love restaurants that serve the ossobuco with a little marrow spoon so
Right.
you could get in there and get that marrow out.
Now, are these shanks?
Yes, lamb shanks, and these are the foreshanks, so they come from the front shoulder. And when you're making a lamb shoulder roast, it's best to remove the shanks and to cook these separately. So although they look large, it's the perfect portion for one person, so you'll get about 10 to 12 ounces of finished meat from it.
Now, this is lamb.
That's the lamb neck. So when we want to talk about flavor, the connective tissue of everything that holds up the head, it's just a cut that's packed with collagen. And when we're talking about slow cooking and braising, all that collagen's going to really cook down and become gelatinous and delicious.
And this looks wonderful, too.
Yes, the infamous pork butt.
So that's here?
That's what it would sound like it's from. Pork butt is actually the front shoulder.
The front shoulder. So
So-
how come they call it pork butt?
Back in the day, pork butts were shipped mostly up to Boston and that area in huge containers called butts.
Oh, I see.
Right.
Okay.
So there's a lot of misconceptions as to why it's called pork butt. That's the reason.
But what a great cut for braising and for serving pulled like barbecue.
Exactly. There's nothing better than the front shoulder.
Spare ribs. That's another great thing to braise, isn't it?
Yes. These are St. Louis ribs. So what I like to do, though, is I like to leave the skirt steak on. So that's actually the skirt steak of pork.
I see.
And I think that a lot of restaurants...
This lifts up.
Right, that lifts up.
Oh, I
but that's
see.
really delicious meat. And I feel that a lot of restaurants feel they need to clean all that off and make a beautifully looking rectangle shape, where I just like to leave it on, and I think that that's delicious meat to pull off.
Then pork belly.
Yes. So pork belly is delicious, braised, but when you're braising it, you need to remove the skin. So you have your butcher remove the skin unless you're going to finish it off and make
So
it
this
crispy.
is the skin. This is it already skinned, right?
Right. So that's a good slab of it with the skin removed. And to start braising this, the best way is to sear the fat side up. So where the skin was, you want to put that down on a hot, flat surface and then reduce that fat a little bit and then start your braise.
And it's so tender, melts in your mouth. And then chicken legs and thighs.
Yes, there has been so much talk lately about chicken dark meat. And I think for many, many years, we've all been trained to eat the white meat and the breast meat, but the chicken thighs and the dark meat is where all the flavor is. So with breast meat, unless you're going to grill it, you usually have to bring fat to it, like a breaded chicken cutlet or something like that. Whereas dark meat, you just have to grill it or braise it. You don't have to add anything or fry it.
Yeah. Well, this is quite a good primer on cuts of meat that are perfect for braising. And Pat, thank you very much for dropping by. Thanks for bringing us examples of all these wonderful cuts. And I'm sure everybody has learned a lot, as I have.
Well, thank you for having me.
When I was growing up on Elm Place in New Jersey, in Nutley, New Jersey, every single home had its version of pot roast. At our house, the pot roast was born out of frugality. It was a dish made with inexpensive cuts of meat and basic root vegetables cooked together in the same pot. And that meal stretched to make meals for days to come, even in a family like ours of 6 kids and 2 adults. And today, well, the pot roast is still a favorite money-saving dish. This is one of my favorite things to do, braise a nice chunk of meat like this chuck eye roast. First step is to brown the meat. Very essential. You want a good-looking piece of brown meat when you're finished. And you can't brown meat in liquid. It just won't brown. Even in the oven, it just won't brown if there's any moisture whatsoever. So we're going to brown the meat first in a little bit of olive oil right in the pot in which we're going to make the pot roast. Before you brown it, put some salt and pepper all over it. A generous amount, rub it into the meat. Pre-seasoning is a really important part of the process. It's good to keep a piece of paper, parchment paper, under the meat. That way you really keep your counter clean. And when working with raw meat, remember to wash your hands after, and remember your pepper should be freshly ground, your salt, a good quality. Okay, ready to start browning. Quite hot in the bottom of this pan. You're going to hear a lot of sizzling there. And don't try to turn the meat until it easily releases. It'll tell you when it's ready to turn. Smells good already. Now, most pot roasts, most braises start with a mirepoix, which is a combination of aromatic vegetables, generally an onion, a carrot, and a stalk of celery. And we're just going to cut the onion into thin slices like this. Coarsely chop the celery and carrots, which have been peeled. The same combination of vegetables is called a sofrito in Italian. So they're ready to go. I think we can try to turn the meat. Lifting easily. This is a very wonderful piece of meat, browning perfectly. Look at that fabulous color that it's getting. That's what you want on your finished pot roast. You'd want a nice dark exterior and a well-cooked, silky result. The meat has been tied. That holds the shape. The browning of the meat takes about 8 to 10 minutes. Have patience. It's worth it. Now remove the meat to a baking sheet. There. Oh, great looking. So delicious. And now to the pot. Just add your lovely onions, your thyme, bay leaf, peppercorns, carrots, and celery. And you don't really want to brown the onion as much as make it translucent in the olive oil. For most braising, you would have this kind of a base of vegetables in the bottom of the pan. This takes 2 or 3 minutes. And if they start to cook too much, you can add just a little bit of water to stir up the brown bits, and I'm going to do that right now, just a little bit. Well, the onion has softened, the celery too. Carrots take a little bit longer because they're harder, but it's ready and time to add the flour. Just 1 tablespoon of flour will do, and cook that well done. You don't want to have a floury taste. And the flour allows the liquid to be absorbed and sauce to thicken. Once the flour is well done, add the rest of your water. And so altogether, we've added about 1 1/4 cups of water. Now, some people might want to add a little bit of red wine, beef stock, veal stock, vegetable stock. It really doesn't matter, but I think water just works very well. And about 2 tablespoons of red wine vinegar for a little bit of acidity. So can you see how it's thickening? So now, just lower the heat so it's simmering but not boiling. And the liquid should come up only about 1 inch on the sides of the meat. And here goes our meat. Cover it tightly. And with less liquid in the pot, you'll need to watch it more carefully and turn the roast more frequently. Just cook, turning every 30 minutes until tender, 2.5 to 3 hours. So now the meat is quite beautiful. Remove it carefully to a baking sheet like this. You're going to put the meat back in, but we want to cook the rest of the vegetables. And we want to strain this gravy. So into a bowl, just strain, and we'll also take out a little bit of the fat. So all the aromatics have really cooked down. Press them through the sieve as much as you can. So this is basically the gravy and the sauce. Put this back into the pot, but you see you have a pretty nice brown gravy. It's very, very tasty. And the vegetables, about 3/4 pound of carrots, of turnips, and of tiny baby potatoes. You can use quarters or sliced potatoes, thickly sliced potatoes too. This is the nice turnip. And peel the turnip, and I'm cutting it into wedges, sort of like apples for an apple pie. And now turn the heat back on. Once this comes back to a simmer, put the meat back on top, cover, and cook for another 15 to 20 minutes or until the vegetables are tender to the point of a knife. So the meat is out of the gravy. It looks really tender and so delicious. Now remove carefully the trussing strings. Now it's important to let the meat rest for about 10 or 15 minutes, because if you try to slice it when it's really, really hot, it may just completely fall apart. This is a very tender cut of meat. Now that looks like pot roast. Grandma Gilbert's, Grandma Roskovsky's, Grandma Kostira's, my mother's, mine, and now yours. The meat has reached the right consistency. When it is silky, can be shredded easily, and the meat should be very, very tender, but firm enough just to slice so it looks like that. Now that looks really good. Braised pot roast. Now this is a pork shoulder. It's the meat from the shoulder of the pig with all the connective tissue around its complex muscle structure. And it needs to be cooked long and slowly to break down the muscles, while the extra fat will add flavor and melt through the meat, making it moist. Now the first thing we do with a shoulder like this is to dry marinate it. And I'm making the marinade. It is 3 tablespoons of brown sugar, packed, 2 tablespoons of coarse salt, which doesn't have to be packed, 2 teaspoons of sweet paprika, and use a nice sweet paprika, 1 teaspoon of pepper, a 1/2 teaspoon of dry mustard, and cayenne pepper, a 1/2 teaspoon, and cumin. Cumin, oh, just a wonderful, wonderful flavor, and that too is about a half a teaspoon. So stir that all up, and it's quite red, so I would suggest wear a pair of rubber gloves to rub this into the meat. I keep a box of surgeon gloves right under my kitchen sink because it really does save your hands from peeling beets to chopping very green herbs to rubbing something like a pork shoulder. And as you rub it in, you can see the fat assumes the color of the paprika and the cumin. And this should stay on the meat for, as I said, 2 hours or overnight in the refrigerator. So I would say that's well coated, and now wrap the whole thing with some plastic wrap and put into the refrigerator. The sugar caramelizes as the meat cooks and adds a nice deep color to the meat. So here's our colorful pork butt. It is a little bit wet, so make sure before you start to brown it, and we're going to sear it in a big pan in which it's going to cook, make sure that you try to dry it as well as you can with paper toweling. Just about 3 tablespoons of vegetable oil. Canola oil is good, grapeseed oil is good. You could use peanut oil. Now the pork butt, as you heard Pat LaFreda tell us, is really not the butt of the pork, but the shoulder. Pork butt like this, it weighs anywhere from 8 to 10 pounds, and it will serve a crowd as shredded pork on buns with barbecue sauce. That's how we're going to use it. It is browning nicely. You can see the bone right here. That's the shoulder bone. And remember which side is the fatty side, because that side has to be up during the braising process, because all that nice fat's going to drip down the sides and into the meat itself. See the nice caramelization? That's the sugar. It is helping this meat caramelize, and it smells so good. I can smell the cayenne, and I can smell the cumin and the paprika all at once. And we have one more side to brown. Okay, we're ready to go here. Now add 2 cups of water. It might splutter a little bit. Have your oven preheated to 325 degrees, and make sure that you have moved all racks to 2 inches from the bottom. You have to leave plenty of room for a pot this size. We'll cover the pot and into the oven. It's going to be staying in there for 5 to 6 hours, and you're going to baste it every hour for 5 to 6 hours. There it is in all its glory. It is a fantastic piece of meat. Oh, it is falling apart, as it should. We're going to use 2 forks to shred it and have the best pork barbecue. And that is a really beautiful pile of pork. Just take 2 forks and a piece of the meat and shred it like this. So beautiful. Because it's so perfectly cooked, the meat does shred very, very nicely. So now, would you like a sandwich? A pork sandwich, yum. And we have a Texas-style barbecue sauce, which is wet and spicy. A pile of the shredded meat. Don't skimp. And maybe another little spoon of sauce right here. That looks like a really good barbecue sandwich. Looks great. Enjoy. It's fit for a crowd. Vegetables also can be braised, and while almost any vegetable can be cooked in this manner, some of my favorites include leeks, fennel, broccoli rabe, and cabbage. Today I'm going to share my recipe for braised red cabbage and caramelized apples. It's a very delicious recipe, and the process really is the same process that you would use pretty much for any of the vegetables I just mentioned. Now, the first thing we do for the cabbage braise is to melt some butter, 6 tablespoons, in a large, deep skillet. Melt a half a cup of sugar in the butter, a whole half a cup, and 1 1/4 teaspoons of salt. The apples and the onions are going to caramelize in this mixture. And sugar is needed to caramelize the apples and the onions and balance the tart flavor of the vinegar that's added towards the end. Vegetables that are going to be braised should be cut in rather large pieces. They will hold together nicer that way. And we have 2 apples cut in wedges, peeled, cored, and I hope you all have an apple corer like this. It really allows you to get nice pieces of apple. Make sure there's no peel left. You don't want to have any of that green peel. And cut the apple into 6 equal pieces. The onion, too, has to be cut into big wedges. Cut this into 8 equal pieces. There. So now sugar is melting well in the butter. So now once all that sugar is melted into the butter, place the onions and the apples in a single layer. It'll pretty much crowd the pan, and you will cook, caramelizing everything for about 10 minutes. So beautiful. So braising really cooks everything until it's soft and tender, but everything is still recognizable, which is important. After a few minutes, they're going to start getting a little bit of color, so watch carefully and you can turn them over. Now the cabbage. Nice little head. I've removed the outer leaves, the tough outer leaves, and cut off the stem end, and cut the cabbage into 8 pieces. And there's a very hard core in the cabbage. We want the cabbage to hold together, so just take out a little bit of that center core. Just enough to make it a little bit more tender, but not enough to make it fall apart. So you can see the apples have taken on a little brown color, as have the onions. Now, time to add the cabbage. Just lay the cabbage right on top. These nice wedges of red cabbage leaves. And we add water and also vinegar. Adding an acid like vinegar helps to develop the complex flavors in the dish. And the acid also in the vinegar helps to keep the cabbage a bright purple color. So 3/4 cup of water and the same amount of cider vinegar. I like cider vinegar. It goes very, very nicely with cabbage, with apples, with onions. Bring that to a boil, cover, and then simmer until the cabbage is tender. That takes about 25 to 30 minutes. It looks really great. You can just pour it out onto a platter. The apples have totally disintegrated, which is great. It sort of makes like an applesauce base. The onions are still visible. This is a great dish to serve with roast loin of pork, with roast turkey or chicken. Thanks for joining me today. I will see you again on another episode of Cooking School.